The process we created using Rootly's tooling has made way for a shift in our culture. And I touched on that very briefly, but we now harvest data for metrics, MTTM, MTR, that kind of stuff. We actively drive them down, which our customers appreciate, but the culture is now actively making room for prevention. And that's the real benefit, I think, of this tool. So I am the problem and incident manager. I handle all of the configuration and tools around the reactive capacity of incident management, how you get people engaged, how you notify them, how you capture all the data you need, and how you resolve the issue itself. And then I also manage the problem space, which is the kind of sneaky underbelly of incidents, how you identify what types of things are potentially problems in the future, how you be a little bit more proactive. So you connect stories with data, you have gut feelings about something, and so you dig in and you present these kinds of things to people who are doing prioritization around the org, try and shift things towards a more stable platform in general. Webflow is a visual-first platform. It's used to create, optimize, and scale web experiences. And we're not a templated site builder like GoDaddy or Wix or Squarespace. And we're not on the other end of the spectrum like the really expensive products like Adobe. We're kind of halfway in between, just a visual platform that people like to use. We're about 750 people, give or take. And we're remote first, although we do have an office in San Francisco where I want to say maybe 60 or so folks are regularly or semi-regularly, mostly people local at the area.
Awesome. And remind me, about how long has it been since you all started using Rootly?
Just about a year, I think.
Oh,
I think actually plus or minus a week or two.
whoa, time flies.
Yes,
That's
it
actually
does.
cute that it's been almost a year. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the before state. Before you all started using Rootly, what was management like, and what kind of challenges led you down the path of considering maybe some sort of tooling or platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a side hustle for a couple of the engineering managers here. And for a long time, that was okay. We were a much smaller company. Our operations weren't terribly complex, that kind of stuff. And so we had a couple of in-house bots and really basic tooling and stuff that operated our incident system. But at some point, we scaled out of that being the right solution for us. And we needed something really dedicated to this. So I transitioned from a different role into this role. And I started looking at tooling options. We needed something to replace what we were doing. We needed something to handle scale with a lot more configurability, that kind of thing.
Okay, perfect. And maybe we can dig even a little bit more into, managing incidents. Were there things in particular you are finding with the set of, automations and processes you had that weren't working anymore? You had mentioned, you started kind of hit a point of complexity where things started to not meet your needs anymore. What was that like in maybe some examples?
Oh, it was tough, is what it was. We lacked core data, things like mean time to anything, the consistency in the way we approached incidents. So obviously well, you hope it's not the same people fighting the same fires over and over. It's different people doing different things, but it's very difficult to compare incidents or gather sweeping data points or make systemic change when the way you approach an incident isn't consistent. And so we didn't have any visibility. There was no iterability at all. The tooling, like I said, was very minimal. And we were quickly outpacing it. And so we started to ask questions like, how long does it take us to resolve an incident or mitigate for customers? How severe is it? And we couldn't get anywhere close to answering those questions.
Right. And so you set out to look at the available tooling on the market. I guess, like, what were your impressions of what was out there? Did you look at several different tools before? Obviously, you ended up Rootly, we know that, but what was the evaluation like for you?
Yeah, we evaluated a handful of tools. It was about a couple of things. Did it have the configurability to make the transition from the old world to the new world relatively seamless? The idea is that I could configure a tool behind the scenes so that nobody even knew that it changed. And then we could handle the training later because we had the burning fire of we need something in place right now. And so that was a huge component. I needed a product team as a partner who really knew their product front to back, and Rootly absolutely had that. It was fantastic. And then that customizability was key for us. Obviously we needed to customize into the way we were working at that point, but also we needed to grow far beyond that. We needed to evolve our systems and stuff. And so customizability and kind of future growth was also a major component for us.
Right, that makes sense. And so once you had decided on Rootly, maybe talk to me a little about that implementation process and how you went from, we just got this new tool to something that is actively in use at the organization. Um, about like how long that took and how did that process look for you?
Challenges is that we weren't using another publicly available tool. We were using this in-house system. And so in trying to configure an external tool, Rootly, to match an internal tool, there was a lot of extra overhead for the support folks at Rootly. And the support engineering group was fantastic. It took about 2 weeks or so to really get all of the components put together. And I think the full cutover happened about 3 weeks after contract sign, thereabouts. And I worked with them every single day. Just a remarkable group of people, knew the product, knew what its limitations were, and then knew ways around a lot of the things that I ran into. And so the actual implementation process, while very laborious and awfully tedious, was pretty smooth as it could be, that's for sure. Way better than I expected it.
Awesome. That's great to hear. I'm sure Andre Yang, our genius solutions engineer, was all over that. Every time I think I've finally found something Rootly can't do, Andre like has a way.
Yeah, he, I think, probably grew to fear my chats, at least.
He's a tough guy. He'll be okay. Well, that's awesome. I still even, just a couple weeks with a fairly complex custom setup. Sounds pretty good to me. So what does it look like? How has really improved things?
God, every way. It's improved everything. So the basics, right? So we have data, we have consistent workflows, we have visibility and documentation. A lot of the operational overhead has been reduced. There is, of course, some operational overhead. There's no way around that. But the automations of the systems that work behind the scenes allow me to expand the complexity of our system pretty drastically without relying on people to make change. I can make all those workflows happen myself. I can automate their triggers. I can get everything to happen, according to the order you need them, that kind of stuff. And nobody is really the wiser. So I can then take the information we harvest. I can take the refined documentation and stuff. I can fold the feedback from people in, just implement that change, and people can continue going about their business without having to relearn an entire application or an entirely new workflow or anything like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's incredible the amount of stuff that you can just not have to train people on altogether by just building it really simply into the tool. I remember I've built out instant response programs before where we had like a whole section of the playbook on just how to notify specific executives for specific types of incidents because they had different preferences and different services they wanted to know about. When you use a tool like Rootly, you don't even have to tell anyone that needs to happen. It just happens on its own.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It has made my life much easier.
Awesome. Are there any features or engines in particular that you all use and really love within Rootly?
Yeah. So Webflow is a very Slack and Atlassian centric shop. We don't use really email for anything. We don't use phone calls for much. All communication, by and large, happens within the scope of Slack. And so that integration is absolutely key to our incident response. And then Atlassian, we use Jira and Confluence. And so the ability to create documentation in Confluence, the ability to create tickets for working and measuring data and that kind of stuff within Jira is marvelous. It wouldn't be the same without those.
Yeah, I love the Jira integration. That bidirectional sync is so cool that you don't have to create Jira tickets. You can resolve wherever, and you just know that everything behind the scenes is taking care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so as for outcomes, obviously, the way you talk about it, you can tell that incident management, it feels easier, it feels more effortless, but have you recorded it is in terms of how you measure the success of your programs as like before and after using a tool like ours?
I have, although I think the better question for our situation, because we didn't have any kind of data before, is to compare the beginning of Rootly to now. And so that first month or so of Rootly really captured the state of things. We started to apply data to the way we were operating. And it was not great. The after Rootly, the today, is drastically different. Not only do we have our mean time to everything, but we can do incident counts, we can do severity counts, we can compare different teams and different departments and different pieces of the organization, how often and how badly things go down. Uh, but we've also increased ownership, and that's huge. Teams now have the visibility to get this data themselves, and they can then take ownership of reducing incidents or reducing a mean time to resolve or mitigate for their own section of the customer base, for their own section of our product offering.
Yeah, and that's actually really common that we hear like the before versus after. A lot of users are like, well, all we knew before was that it was bad. We really had no idea how bad. We weren't really measuring anything because getting that aggregated incident data is such a huge challenge in the first place that really solves for outside of just, actually making managing the incidents easier.
Mhm.
That's really, really good to hear. Other than that, I guess I just want to open it up. Is there anything else that you would want to share about your experience working with us that you think companies who are maybe considering finding incident management tooling should know?
Yeah. So, like I said, the implementation process was marvelous. And every month or so, I come up with more challenging questions for the team. And every month or so, they answer them. And so, anytime I'm like, you know what, I've put down the tooling for a while, I'm back, I have more ideas. How do I do this crazy thing? There's a lot of back and forth to really understand what I'm even talking about. And then once the team gets it, they take it and run. And so sometimes it's the same day, sometimes it's a day later or 2 days later, they'll come back and say, look, we figured it out. Here is the thing you need. Here's how to work around this system or to get the specific type of data out of the system that you need. That it alone has been marvelous because I can come up with a crazy off the cuff idea and then the team helps me implement it. I do that to them more often than I'd like to admit. But ultimately, release impact on our incident response is only part of the picture. So because I spread the incident and problem spaces, the process we created using release tooling has made way for a shift in our culture. And I touched on that very briefly, but we now harvest data for metrics, MTTM, MTR, that kind of stuff. We actively drive them down, which our customers appreciate, but the culture is now actively making room for prevention. And that's the real benefit, I think, of this tooling. It's taking the pressure off of the other places. Without a way to discuss figures like MTTM, a company can't really hope to look beyond them at the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit of a hammer is in the structure that you build, not the nails you drive with it. And Rootly is our hammer, and the structure is the whole incident and problem management culture. It's just drastically changed the way we approach the whole system.
I think that's such a great picture into why we love working with folks like you who are in these highly dedicated roles too, because you don't get that everywhere. Like you said, a lot of the time, incident management, it is going to start as the side of an engineering manager or customer support manager's desk. And when you get people in these roles where, your whole focus is on this space, we get to just see you do the most amazing things with the platform. Even though, like you said, sometimes it means bringing us some complex use cases that we need to unpack and figure out. I think that's ultimately what really pushes the platform and pushes us to think about how are, the teams that are really pushing this industry forward, like Webflow, and pushing this problem space forward. What are the problems that you're solving with the tool, and what do you need the tool to do? That's such a good litmus test for us to know this is what everyone's going to expect 2-3 years from now, is the stuff that Webflow is doing today, because there's such a focus on building out this incident management problem and culture. So we love working with your team. It's so cool to see the things that you guys have done already in just a year using the tool. I can only imagine what it's going to look like a year from now. I think it's pretty obvious that Webflow is poised for a lot of growth. So hopefully we'll get to grow right alongside you. And yeah, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Colin, for taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Appreciate the time.